Hello everyone, it's Theme Park Avenue, I'm Eric, and today I am ranking every hypercoaster I've been on. So before we begin, I'll quickly get out of the way what counts. I'm counting every roller coaster that has a drop or hill that is 200 feet, but I'm not counting anything that would be classified as a Giga or Strata coaster. There will be a few unorthodox things on here, but most of them are pretty standard hypercoasters. We have 24 to get through, let's begin. Number 24 is Goliath at Six Flags Magic Mountain. This one is good. Some hate it, I enjoy it. However, it's not great. There isn't really anything besides the intense helixes that stand out as, wow, those were fun elements, I want to do that again. The first drop is The airtime moments provide a little bit of airtime, but not a lot. The ride's pacing is pretty bad because of the helix stop, mid-course brake run, that's awful. And the ride itself doesn't bring a whole lot outside of a grand, large hypercoaster to be in the park, and I guess to also hold a lot of people in line. It's not really one of the best rides out there, and definitely my least favorite hypercoaster. Number 23 is Magnum XL-200 at Cedar Point. This one could have been higher. My best rides on it probably would be a few spots higher, but my worst rides would have been right back in spot 24. This is an inconsistent coaster, and more than pretty much any ride, where you sit drastically will influence how much you like the ride. It's one where, I think if you've only ridden it once, more than the majority of coasters, you have not gotten the full experience to really know if you like the ride or not. It's such an anomaly. Overall, I think the best rides have great airtime and they're not too painful, but the worst rides are among my least favorite experiences on any major roller coaster, honestly, because of how painful they get. So it kind of lands near the bottom because of that. Number 22 is Superman Ride of Steel at Six Flags America. A good hypercoaster, but with some fine tuning could have been a good 10 spots higher. This one, the good things are the first drop, the airtime moments are pretty strong, and the helixes are good. Now there are some complaints people have that I don't think are that major, the main one being the straight track. I think it's fine. The straight track stuff is not a big issue and it doesn't feel that long on some rides. The bigger issue for me is, first of all, the ride's layout is good, but kind of weirdly paced. It's hard to say, but the first parts feel insanely fast, and by the end it seems like you've lost a lot of speed. And it just feels like a weaker version of Magnum's finale. Fortunately, there is other stuff to enjoy, but the other issue is the cars are pretty tight and painful, so with changes to the restraints and some minor changes in the layout, this could have been higher. Number 21 is Ride of Steel at Darien Lake. This is the same ride. I didn't think it was really that much better in any regard, with the exception of the scenery. Some like the wooded setting of Six Flags America's Ride of Steel, but I prefer this lake setting, and that's why it's a bit higher. Number 20 is Titan at Six Flags Over Texas. This is much better than Goliath. I think the speed is held way better the whole way through, and the helixes are more intense. I enjoy the intensity throughout the ride, and I think it's pretty much what Goliath was supposed to be. Now obviously there are flaws. The airtime, first drop, and mid-course brake run are not great. Mid-course is not as bad for me as Goliath's was, but I still do think it's a little lackluster at certain parts of the ride, but what's good is very good. Number 19 is Mr. Freeze Reverse Blast at Six Flags St. Louis. This is a fun ride. The first really unorthodox hypercoaster on the list, I thoroughly enjoy. The elements are all great: inverted top hat, the overbank, and the spike. That's obviously only 3 elements plus a launch, but the fact that you go back through them forward is also fun. I'm going to talk about this one a little more later, but the main thing is this ride is a little rough in most rows, and I think it's very fun, but it is held back a little bit by being a shorter ride, and I think it could have been a little more intense and fun. Number 18 is Sky Rush at Hershey Park. A hard one to rank. I can, to an extent, look past the flaws and say, there are some top-notch elements. The first drop and turn is quite intense and powerful, and some of the airtime moments are great. Unfortunately, there are two flaws, those being the restraints, so we've all talked about that before, I'm not really going to go into that at all, and the length. This is a very short ride. It feels shorter than Mr. Freeze to me. And that kind of holds the ride back because it feels like, is this really the grand hypercoaster so many consider one of the best in the world? But at the very least, there are some great elements, and that's why it's not at 24 or 23. Number 17 is Accelerator at Knott's Berry Farm. This is an excellent ride, and while it is still not a long one, it ranks higher for the amazing station launch and the pretty phenomenal turns that follow that have Titan level intensity. Yes, this ride's short, but it gets a little higher for being a bit sweeter than Skyrush and Mr. Freeze. Except not really. Number 16 is Mr. Freeze at Six Flags Over Texas. Better than the St. Louis one in every way. Smoother, more powerful launch, far more intense, looks nicer, I just like everything about it more, and that's why it gets a pretty high ranking comparatively. That's all I gotta say. Number 15 is Valravn at Cedar Point. Dive coasters get a lot of hate, but the only real flaw I have with this one is the mid-course brake run. And yes, it does kill the ride to an extent for a bit, but for me that does not take away from how awesome the elements are. I love the first drop, every inversion, the airtime hill gives way more than people give it credit for, and I just think it's super enjoyable, and while still technically a bit short, this one is the sweetest of the short ones I've mentioned so far. Number 14 is SheiKra at Busch Gardens Tampa. A more intense dive coaster overall. I feel like the drop is just as good, the inversions are just as good, but presentation is really where this one stands out. I love the water splash, I like that the second drop is better because you don't have as much of a mid-course brake run, and the setting of the ride is beautiful. Not to mention, thanks to Zambia Smokehouse, this is the best smelling roller coaster in history, as weird as that might sound. Number 13 is Nitro at Six Flags Great Adventure, the first of the fantastic B&M hypers on the list. Nitro, I just feel is less memorable than most of the other hypers. Still great, but I'm just gonna leave it at that. I love the ride, and I know something is one of the best B&M hypers, but for me, it's just not quite there. Number 12 is Intimidator at Carowinds. One many think is worse because of Intimidator, but I still thought the floater airtime was some of the best on any hypercoaster. And I love floater airtime, so that spoke to me. It's a wonderful ride, one of the best at Carowinds, and gets a bit too much hate for those trims. Number 11 is X2 at Six Flags Magic Mountain. A weird hypercoaster for sure, and it made the list only on the drop being larger than 200 feet. But the thing that I've talked about before for X2 is that while certainly intense and disorienting at first, that quote-unquote extreme feeling wears off pretty quickly. And by the very end of the ride, you have one of the most painful finales in history, so that holds it back in the way Magnum's kind of held back. But it still has some top-notch moments like the first drop and the elements that follow that. And one other thing, fire never works. Just, you know what I mean, if you've been on X2. Number 10 is Thunder Dolphin at Tokyo Dome. This is the only roller coaster on the list outside of North America, and it's weird that I've been on this one, but it's a great hypercoaster. The first drop, excellent, weaving through buildings is fun, there's some strong airtime moments and a great sense of speed. I thoroughly enjoy it, and I think it is among the best roller coasters out there overall. It wouldn't be quite top 25 for me, but it's pretty close, and I absolutely love it. Number 9 is Candymonium at Hershey Park. This is my favorite ride at Hershey Park, I've mentioned before. I know that's weird, but that's just how it is. It is a wonderful hyper. There is very little to complain about. The trim sometimes activates, but it's not always that strong. And between the first drop, the floater hills, the fun finale that goes to the main path, I like everything about it. It's just a fun ride and a pretty memorable one, so it definitely had to get a pretty good ranking on this list. Number 8 is Raging Bull at Six Flags Great America. This one is very hard to review. It doesn't really have amazing elements outside of the first drop. Many have complained that it's forceless and lacks airtime and all that, and they're not wrong. But it's a fun ride. It's an experience. And it has a decent sense of speed for me that allows it to feel like a bit of an adventure, in the same way Millennium Force or the Beast at King's Island feels. I like that even though it's not very spread out, it feels like you're exploring a huge plot of land. You're going up and down through all the turns, and it is a blast. I love Raging Bull, and while I can't perfectly describe why, I'm not changing my mind on that. Number 7 is Behemoth at Canada's Wonderland. This one, bafflingly, has a first drop that is just leagues better than every other B&M Hyper. I do not know why, but it does. It has some good airtime after that, and then a brake run that kind of hurts the Helix and the finale, so that does hold it back a little bit, but that first drop is something else. Number 6 is Goliath at Six Flags Over Georgia. Similar to Behemoth, but this one is better because not only does the setting kind of help the ride a lot, but there's no harsh brake run for the Helix, meaning the finale gives straight up ejector. Add that to the great first drop and the phenomenal floater before that, and this is one of the best B&M Hypers. Yes, there is a little bit of rattle on this one, but it doesn't hurt for me, and that's why I think it's one of the best. Number 5 is Mako at SeaWorld Orlando. Mako has an underrated second half, and I love the airtime hills that come before that. The 5-second one stands out, but the second half has some punchy moments, and I love going over the water Candymonium style, so it's definitely a phenomenal ride, and I see why many would put it at pretty much number 3 on this list. Number 4 is Diamondback at King's Island, the best and final of these B&M Hypers I'm mentioning. Diamondback goes somewhat into the woods, doesn't always have a trim, provides some of the best floater airtime, has some more unique elements, and I love the water splash at the end. There is sometimes a rattle, I'll give it that. I will admit that that's not perfect, but I love Diamondback. It is an absolutely great experience. Blast in the same way Raging Bull is, but with more objectively good elements. Number 3 is Superman the Ride at Six Flags New England. Superman the Ride is the best of traditional hypercoasters, hands down, or in some cases, hands up. This ride is near perfect. The first drop, the massive floater hills that follow, and the unbelievable ejector hills that follow that. Some nice little theming moments, and an intense sort of twister second half that weaves in and out of tunnels. Feels like a long ride, and honestly, the Superman music that plays as you go up adds quite a bit. And I think the ride is one of the few where the DC theming actually does benefit the ride. So the only issue is restraints, and it's not even the lap bars themselves, it's the metal size of the lap bars that are really tight. But that doesn't really bother me on the ride, so this got a very high ranking. Number 2 is Steel Vengeance. Now that everyone's calling this a hypercoaster, of course it's going to be pretty high up on the list. And yeah, it meets the requirements. You have a wonderful 205-foot drop, and following that, you have some of the craziest moments of any roller coaster. The Outer Bank, the first airtime hill before that, and the inversions are still pretty strong too. The finale is brutal in the best possible way, and there's very little that can possibly be improved about it, besides maybe restraints. It was my favorite roller coaster for a while, an absolute rush, and I loved it. That said, number 1 as of recently, most of you know it, it's Iron Gwazi. Iron Gwazi is just the king for me. The first drop is way better than Steel Vengeance, the Outer Bank's just as good. The death roll puts all inversions on any other RMC to shame, with the exception of maybe some stalls. The wave turn is nuts. The ride is shorter than Steel Vengeance, but honestly, I think every element brings so much to the table, and some have complained about transition elements not being a big thing on Iron Gwazi, but honestly, I don't mind it because it allows you to focus on the actual good stuff instead, and I think it's like a fine-tuned version of Steel Vengeance. Iron Gwazi deserves all the hype it's gotten, and it is definitely my favorite roller coaster and favorite hypercoaster as a result. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed this video, comment down below your favorite hypercoasters, and subscribe for more content. I'll see you next time.